Subscribe to our YouTube channel for in-depth interviews of India Inc. and press the bell icon so that you do not miss our updates.
Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Nirmal I'm Hiral Dadia. We have with us Mr. Y.K. Alagh, former Union Minister, former Chairman IRMA, and noted agriculture economist joining us on the show. It's a pleasure to have you on the show, Dr. Alagh. And a few learnings that I've taken from you so far, at least on this side of the businesses, through all the readings that I've done, with what you've written. And I think this is the second or the third opportunity that I've got to speak to you as well. And it's a great pleasure to be speaking to you. Welcome to the show. Dr. Alagh, my first question coming to you is, being a veteran, in this industry right now, the number of years of experience that you've had as well. In fact, I mean, we just offline spoke about another pandemic that you've already dealt with. If we have to talk about COVID-19 right now, how different is it from the previous pandemics that we've seen so far? And do you think we are dealing with it in the right fashion?
It's different in the sense that uh, in the earlier pandemics, we did have more of safety built in. Now, this is one has to qualify such statements. It depends on how well off you are, your understanding of the world, your access to medical attention. And this time, uh, nobody really knows how to avoid it. We do know how to treat it. Uh, I thought that there were reasonable prospects that we would get preventive vaccination, which happened in the all the earlier pandemics, whether it was the flu, the HNI, and so on, in a few months. But you are telling me that the news today is not too good on that. Well, I have to wait for the newspapers tomorrow because I don't follow it on ticker. But otherwise, one was hoping that towards the end of the year, there would be the safety clauses. And a person like me who has a lung problem, I have vaccination against pneumonia. And even then I got pneumonia. So I asked my doctor, who's one of the best pulmonologists, he said, sir, there are 29 kinds of pneumonia,
Mm.
and you got only the very mild one because vaccines only protect you against some. So vaccines are not perfect, but they do give you a degree of security, and the kind of way in which we used to respond to these threats when I was leaving school is no
Mm.
longer the kind of way to which we do now. So the trouble with the COVID is that it's more or less going back to the old pandemics because our knowledge to prevent it is very rudimentary,
Mm.
and we do say social distancing, wash your hands, yet to enforce that at a community level is not that easy.
Mm.
I mean, Thaltej, where I live, is a hot spot because there are labor colonies here,
Mm.
and it's not the bungalows. We are all right, but but one of the things that is turning out is that the basic equality of man, in some kind of a very perverse manner, comes out in such events.
Mm. Absolutely. What you're saying is actually very true right now with the day and age. that we're living in. But Dr. Alagh, with this, if you have to talk about the Indian economy as a whole, I mean, everyone's spoken enough right now as to what's been the impact on different economies across. However, there has been one distinguish that we're seeing with regards to where revival is concerned is other developed nations are pumping in a lot of money. A lot of money is being printed right now by the systems, and the monetary policies have been really loose. If you have to look at India as an economy, we are an agrarian economy. Now, taking the kind of stimulus measures that the government and the RBI announced so far, what is your assessment of the same?
Well, apart from my own assessment, one should read what the RBI itself says and what the monetary policy says. The RBI has been making it very clear that you need a fiscal stimulus. It's been saying it before the pandemic.
Correct.
This is going back to almost, I would say, 12 quarters. And they have always said, any good monetary economist would say that, they've got some of the best on the Monetary Policy Committee, that you need a fiscal stimulus for monetary policy to work. That is now very, very urgent. And somehow or the other, as Urjit Patel's recent book brings out, you see this notion that if the finance ministry calls some of the bankers and tells them you lend, that becomes the fiscal stimulus, is, I'm afraid, it doesn't work. It wasn't working earlier, so we didn't really have a good manufacturing growth rate. I mean, to get very excited because the quarterly growth rate was 3.2% and not 3.1% is ridiculous. I mean, countries with which we compete in South Asia and Southeast Asia and East Asia have had growth rates always of manufacturing in two-digit numbers. So we needed the fiscal stimulus then. We need it very badly now. And somehow or the other, if we get stuck with and that means a certain degree of resource mobilization so that you are able to spend on those industries which are doing badly. And once you spend there, then demand will pick up and then you'll have the multipliers, and the usual processes of growth. I mean, it takes almost, if past models are of any significance, it takes almost 6 months after a good stimulus for the economy to get going. That's what we've been wanting. Even in last year's budget, it's supposed to come in October, it didn't come. On the other hand, you have admonitions to the bankers to lend. Nahi, wo nahi chalega. The bankers will never talk back, particularly the public sector chiefs will never talk back to the finance minister. I was sitting with my own bank manager and I said, wo unhone bola hai. He said, sir, वो तो बोल देते हैं, लेकिन अगर मेरा लोन खराब हो जाए तो मेरे ऑडिटर आके मुझे बहुत पिटाई करते हैं. So I have to have collateral, whatever they say. So you need government to push the investment. I mean, you need many other things, but the fiscal stimulus is the first one. And frankly speaking, we will also need to get into very soon doing something about a financial mess that we have created. No, I'm not blaming anybody because, when lives are at stake, then these things have to be done. But assuming that we will get a vaccine and we will be getting out of all this, that is, I'm discounting today's ticker news. It wasn't there in the newspapers that I read.
Mm.
That things have that the AstraZeneca is not has been withdrawn. But assuming that the vaccines will work, we will have to clean up the financial mess that we will be giving so that lending can start. I mean, basically, lending can start as a normal process
Mm.
rather than as something exceptional being done in the budget. And then I think we also need to selectively pick up the reform process. You know, reform means many things, and these things take time.
Mm.
Um, I think selling public sector units to the private sector
Mm.
is one part of reform. And yet, reform has to be broad based.
Correct.
Remember that some of the most dynamic events have taken place in the Indian economy when we energize the middle level corporate. It's not just the big boys. I mean,
Mm.
I'm very fond of the big boys. Many of them are from my state.
Mm.
And, personally, I know them. But I do know that if you want a general revival process, then, as the Walmart guys found out, as the digital chaps found out, the earlier story was Bharati,
Mm.
a small company in Ludhiana, going around and creating waves all over the country and the world. That's become a pretty standard practice now. And the more of that we have, the broader will be the base on which the revival will work. So I think some reform chalta rahega. It will take 2-3 years to come. We are all in favor of it, ease of doing business, this, that, and the other. But if we can energize the middle level corporate, the smaller guys, corporates, I don't mean the SMEs,
Correct.
that's another class of problems. Then I think the revival process will be a lot more broad based, and I hope that somebody will be listening to you out there and they will do this. And if your listeners also, if they bring in pressure, because governments respond to pressure. And if we do it on a large enough scale, it's one thing for a former minister who writes in the Indian Express or the business line to say such things in a webinar or in some seminar. It's another thing if it's a broad-based argument saying, "Arey bhai, kuch karo," life is in trouble.
Right.
So I hope those things will happen.
Absolutely. And Dr. Alagh, with this, an interesting aspect that you mentioned with regards to reforms as well. Now, the RBI has come out, they've got rates, they've got the rate, done rate cuts already. Moratorium has been given. Restructuring is another aspect that we are looking at as well, which is taking into consideration. But do you think all of this will really help the financial sector as a whole? Because asset quality, NPAs, is a bigger concern right now as well for the banks. And taking the risk averseness that's present in the system right now, you're not seeing credit growth that is picking up. How is this issue supposed to be dealt with according to you?
You see, you have to have a sense of perspective when we discuss these things.
Mm.
It's easy to say that the RBI is initiatives will not work. But lives are important.
Correct.
So they are reacting to that. They know that some of the things that they're doing, they wouldn't be doing if this was not there. And also, they've made it very clear. And some of the members of the Monetary Policy Committee have actually given interviews outside. This is also a great thing in India. You sit in a committee and then you're a free bird outside. But which is not committee culture anywhere in the world. Huh? Incidentally, if you're overruled in a committee, then you keep quiet. But they make it very clear that the RBI's initiatives will work if there is a fiscal stimulus also. You are, if you think about the great trilemmas, you can't do one at a time. You can fight multiple objectives only if you coordinate policies, which is money, interest rates, government expenditures, incentives for savings, and so on.
Right.
No, there's no one single magic formula. You have to derive the prescription as you go along.
Absolutely. And Dr. Alagh, with this, what's happening right now is any probably say 2 or 3 consecutive good harvests that we see that usually translates into a robust rural demand. So now what everyone is hoping is that even while the industrial, say, as well as the service sectors are still struggling to recover from the adverse impact of this pandemic, it's the agricultural sector that could become an engine for economic recovery. Do you think rural demand is something that will be able to only support the economic recovery, or do you think it can even substitute for the lost urban demand?
No, there's no question that in this annus horribilis, as Queen Elizabeth said, the horrible year, agriculture is the only thing which makes you look up.
Right.
Now, that is true. In my home state also, we are doing reasonably well in agriculture. The country is doing reasonably well. I think we can do better.
Hmm.
You see, what happens, as you said, as we discussed earlier, is that the pandemic means a kind of lockdown which is of a stochastic nature. It's sort of 2 steps forwards, 1 step backwards. You open up and then again you have to close down.
Hmm.
Now, when we lock down, we have to look at the needs of the farmer. When we do this almost random shock. And we have to remember that agriculture all over India is not just Punjab, Haryana, and Western UP, that the government goes and buys the grain and they wah, wah, wah. That's not what it is. In my home state, it can mean tilan, it can mean a dal, it can mean animal husbandry products. And farmers actually use, they trade themselves and they use transport channels. Between Nashik and Bombay, farmers use the railways. This happens between Mehsana and Navsari. So once the trains are gone, that link is gone.
Correct.
Now, I think what we need to do is, one can't argue against a lockdown because, we can't let people die. If they're alive, at least we'll be able to do something for them, even if they starve for some time. But if they're dead, they won't come back. But I think what we can say is that when you do a sudden lockdown on transport, consider the needs of agriculture. because transport is the same thing. It's the other side of the trade coin, as any economist knows, or as any regional economist knows. So when you do the transport bottleneck, try and keep the needs of the farmer in mind. The trains run for public activity. Maybe there can be a couple of bogies to let the farmers do their business the way they were doing earlier. The farmers always use trucks from Nashik to Bombay or from Mehsana to Navsari. Well, make an effort to allow that to happen. That will mean that the, the, the role of agriculture in shoring up the negative thrust of the economy will be more than what it is. It is already there. I think to start bringing your hands on agriculture is being spent. It is in this horrible year, one of the only ray of sunshine one sees. I'm saying accelerate that by policies, and this will need decisions at very high levels because you can't. The collectors will do what they're trained to do. If they see a hot spot, they will say "Band karo." So to be able to sensitize them through some government circulars, when you do that, try and see if you can protect the interest of the farmer. If you tell them that, they'll do it. These are youngsters or middle-aged fellows with a lot of experience, and they can manage. I've written reports on the training of the higher civil services, and I know they can manage, but they have to have instructions.
Right. So taking, the rural India growth story into consideration, what's happened is a lot of migrant labor has gone back. Now, yes, there is some portion of it that is returning back to urban India. However, the remittances to rural areas, Dr. Alagh, have been impacted. Now, if that continues, do you think Agri will be able to offset that negative impact? Or because by the time the migrant laborers come back to urban India to start work completely, we are still some time away from that.
There are no. You can't forecast. A lot depends on policies. There are many studies in the world, including my friend Ivan Aziz from Indonesia, from Thailand, which show that in earlier crises of this kind, when they went back to the village, they brought back skills. Now, if that happened, did we help them? Manriga, did we tell them that they can do something there? This is a year in which if we invest in agriculture, that will be a good thing. Then, of course, when they come back, we have to understand the role of migration in economic development. It's one of the great. There is the Ishikawa hypothesis, which the economist Raj made me and Amit Bhaduri and G.S. Bhalla work on, that agricultural growth always sucks in labor from other parts. Now, we have to encourage that process. When, the only guys I know who encouraged the migrants were the Sardars. Bless them. They gave them food when they were going to be shot. When the police was lathi charging them. There's no way to handle migration. Reduce I, well, I'm old enough never to use strong language, but I think that was very illiterate behavior not to understand the role of the migrant. I mean, as an economist, I'm saying, in the national economy. And even now, now we do because we understand having made some mistakes. But I think the mistakes that we made probably cost us. But देर आए दुरुस्त आए अच्छा hai, and the more we can do it, the better off we'll be. As I said, that is the only bright spot of the economy.
Right. So from here on, if we have to look at agriculture as a sector which is going to be the bright spot from here on, what are the sectoral reforms that are required? And whatever the government has provided right now in the stimulus package, do you think there are enough?
No, I think the fiscal package has to be more. Uh, these are not years in which you start worrying about conventional budget deficits. These are years in which you take some risks because the economy otherwise keeps on spiraling downwards. So that should be the first priority. The more we can spend in rural areas, there will be some advantages in the long run also, because we can tell them to put in more investment in the farm and investment in the supply chain. So the more we put in there, I think the better off we will be. We are not doing exactly that. And I'm not blaming the government. I think when you're in a crisis, but I mean, not everybody is what should be worried about everybody will be worried about the crisis, but not everybody will be just resolving the crisis. They should be doing these sort of, dotting the I's and crossing the T's and doing the smaller things, which will accelerate the role that agriculture is playing and someday help us in getting a manufacturing revival.
Right. So Dr. Alagh, is it right to say that we as an economy have actually reached a stage in which surplus management has become a major challenge, and now the priority should be to move policy strategies that should ensure a sustained, say, increase in the farmers' income as well as reasonable food prices for the consumers?
That is sort of definitionally true. One can't argue with that. The question is in the detail. And there, it's a question of support. As I said, trade channels. We always talk about the AMCs, the electronic trade links. A lot of that doesn't work because a lot of the farmers don't have the IDs with which they can connect with that. And invariably the intermediary, who is the Adatia, becomes the guy who is doing it. There are successful exceptions. I mean, like the Andhra chili market is the one that I've seen where really it works. But even the direct benefit payments in Madhya Pradesh, they were touted about a lot. I was asked to give a well-known lecture there in Bhopal, and I went to some of those. In fact, there were not that many small farmers who were taking advantage of that. And they were still selling to the agent who was really the Artiya. So the more we can concentrate on the success stories and spread them, the better off agriculture will be. And we have to remember that agriculture is a very complex issue in India. We always get trapped in the Punjab Haryana agriculture story. And you're absolutely right that if we give the right signals, the Indian farmer will do whatever you tell him. But we don't really. We, will announce an import of pulses just when the fellow is going to do the sowing or when he's bringing in his crop. And that really hurts them. I mean, I go, even now, not right now, but even a few months earlier, I would take my Maruti and go to a village. And they get very upset at the fact that as they were bringing in the tuer dal, the government announced a big import. Now, please remember that they're very realistic. I mean, they don't expect when they sow, the price might have been 200 rupees a kilo. They know that they won't get 200 rupees, but they don't want the MSP. They want, which may be 120 rupees. They might want, at least they expect 150 to 170. When they don't get that, and partly because of bad policies, they get very disturbed. Now particularly when we are in this kind of a crisis, we have to be very sensitive about those imports, duties, not giving the wrong signals at the time of sowing, at the harvesting time. Improving access. In 1988, one of the things that we did in the drought was to give a lot of money for tank irrigation, for improving irrigation. Now, if you're going to spend money by way of giveaways, you might as well encourage them to build assets around that. So those are the kinds of things we should do.
Right. And
this agriculture, spread the good stories. If Andhra chilies market is working, why is it not working? Improve the databases, because a lot of the forwards and other kinds of trade need price statistics. And the whole business of shooting the postman that, NSS ko report ko band kar do. If you have, everybody has to rely on the CMI for information rather than on official source. This wasn't true. Once upon a time, Indian statistics were very reliable and easily available and had nothing to do with government's objectives. The government could keep on talking, ye ho gaya, wo ho gaya, but the statisticians did their job well. They are sitting on those reports, which I'm sorry, I just feel very disturbed with that. Right. That a report which has been prepared by somebody as competent as Sudipta Mandal has been put in cold storage. Yes, there are alternatives, but we must encourage price statistics. And these are the kinds of years where these details should be looked at a little more, so that when we get out of it, we come out bouncing.
Right. So Dr. Alagh, overall, if you have to look at the revival from here on, the growth which is already negative, if you have to talk about GDP, we've seen contraction, and again, the anticipation is that for a couple of quarters, the contraction could continue. Positive growth is still far away from here on. Apart from agriculture, which are the other sectors, according to you, that the government should look at with regards to providing stimulus?
Basically, the sectors with excess capacity are investment sectors. The consumption sectors are not doing that badly, although they also need demand. So that gets back to the earlier issue. Need actually a fiscal stimulus. I'm sorry, it's not rocket science. It's
Right.
what we study in Samuelson, or whatever. I mean, you that's what you need. That's the first thing. Then, as I said, financial reform. That's a big word, but obviously, the pandemic will lead finances in a complete mess, and somebody will have to sort that out. And somebody had better start thinking now, so that hopefully, I still hope that your news is wrong. Even after the vaccines will come in and we'll get out, at that point we are ready with, uh, cleaning up the financial mess, so that lending, because if lending is not automatic for normal work, the economy will never revive. And finally, as I said, the reform process, we should unleash the animal spirits, not just of the big guys. They're all personal friends, and I wish them well, and they're very important. I mean, I've been a Tata director, and many of the big corporates are from my home state, so we wish them well. But the Bharatis and others, the middle level chaps waiting in the wings, the more broad based this recovery is, the better off we are going to be, hopefully, by next January when I get out. I do hope we'll find a way out of the COVID in the pandemic sense and start living with, you know, whatever it is.
Right. And very lastly, Dr. Alagh, overall, if you go to see right now, we're talking of a stimulus package. Now, if we have to get a fiscal stimulus into place, uh, do you think, number one, inflation is something that needs to be ignored right now? Number two, do you think, with regards to the country's expenditure as well, there could be certain areas which the government could curtail? And if yes, which are those segments where the government could curtail expenses and divert on the revival and growth plan?
Well, curtailment can be done in almost everything apart from defense and basic infrastructure. Uh, Essentials have to be protected. That is an exercise which has to be done by a good economist and a good auditor together, sitting with each ministry and each department.
Hmm.
It's painful, but it can be done. It has been done earlier, and there is no reason why it can't be done now. And as you said, we have to invest in the priority areas in a bigger way, um, so that the demand for capital picks up and capacity utilization improves in industry. We do need, you'll never be able to manage just with services growth and agricultural growth. You need a robust manufacturing sector. We have the capability to do it. Some areas have done it. I mean, everybody says that, you know, you can't increase employment in industry. And I've been saying that my own home state of Gujarat
Hmm.
has a industrial growth rate of around 12%. And even if the employment elasticity of demand is 0.2, you still get a 2% rate of growth in employment. So we have a shift away from agriculture to non-agriculture. It is rubbish to say that you can't bring about structural change. It depends on how fast you grow. And our industry has not been growing at that rate. And in those areas where it has been growing, there has been structural change. Karnataka, Gujarat, to an extent parts of Andhra. So that is the name of the game. We want to uh, invest, improve industry, uh, start utilizing capacities better, and it will be related with agriculture. What is called the rural-urban continuum. A lot of processing of agriculture is actually industry. And in our country, it is spread out because not, if you don't take the Sarkari definition of urbanization, but the census definition. Census towns show that urbanization is far more widespread in India than it is normally believed if you go by government statistics. If you look at census data carefully.
Absolutely, Dr. Alagh. As you're saying, reforms that really need to be focused on fiscal stimulus is going to be the need of the hour from here on, and that's what the government needs to concentrate as well. But thank you so much, Dr. Alagh, for joining us on the show. It was a pleasure to speak to you. Great insights, great information, great views that we picked up from you in today's session. We will speak to you once again pretty soon. But till then, stay safe, and I hope you enjoyed our conversation as well at Nirmal Bank. Thank you so much.
I did, and good luck to you, and thank you.
And wish you the same. Thank you.